Bear cub snagged in a grocery automatic door sensor. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Miller's Grocery, a small family-owned store nestled between towering pine trees in the mountain town of Cedar Falls. The air carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves mixed with the faint aroma of fresh bread from the bakery inside. Cars pulled in and out slowly, their engines humming softly in the peaceful morning routine. Inside her beat-up Honda Civic, 23-year-old Riley Chen adjusted her rearview mirror one more time before stepping out. Her 6-month-old daughter, Mia, gurgled happily from her car seat, tiny hands reaching toward the colorful mobile hanging above her. Riley had been putting off this grocery run for 3 days, but with Mia's formula running low and her own stomach growling from skipping breakfast again, she couldn't delay any longer. "Come on, sweetheart," Riley whispered, lifting Mia from the car seat. The baby's dark eyes sparkled with curiosity as she took in the new surroundings. Riley had always marveled at how alert Mia seemed, as if she understood far more than a 6-month-old should. The pediatrician had mentioned that some babies were just naturally more aware of their environment, but Riley sometimes wondered if there was something special about her daughter's intense gaze. The automatic doors of Miller's Grocery whooshed open as they approached, and Riley grabbed a shopping cart from the row near the entrance. She settled Mia into the cart's baby seat, making sure the safety strap was secure. The baby immediately began babbling, her voice echoing slightly in the store's entrance area. "Riley, good to see you again," called out Mrs. Patterson, the elderly cashier who had worked at Miller's for over 20 years. Her warm smile crinkled the corners of her eyes as she waved from behind Register 3. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," Riley replied, guiding the cart toward the baby food aisle. Mia bounced excitedly in her seat, seemingly fascinated by the fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished floor tiles. What Riley didn't notice was the small commotion beginning to unfold outside. About 50 yards away, near the edge of the parking lot where the asphalt met the tree line, a rustling in the underbrush had caught the attention of Jake Morrison, a delivery driver unloading boxes from his truck. Jake paused, his hand still gripping a case of canned goods, as something small and dark emerged from the bushes. At first, he thought it might be a large dog, but as the creature moved closer to the store, Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was a bear cub, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, with thick black fur and rounded ears that twitched at every sound. The cub moved with the awkward rolling gait typical of young bears, its nose held high as it sniffed the air. Jake knew enough about wildlife to understand that where there was a cub, there was usually a mother nearby. He glanced around nervously, but saw no sign of an adult bear. Inside the store, Riley had made her way to the baby food section, comparing prices on different brands of formula. Mia had grown quieter, her attention seemingly focused on something beyond the store windows. The baby's small hands pressed against the cart's safety bar as she leaned forward slightly, her expression unusually serious for such a young child. "What are you looking at, little one?" Riley murmured, following her daughter's gaze toward the front of the store. Through the large windows she could see the parking lot bathed in morning sunlight, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The cub, meanwhile, had been drawn by a scent that made its stomach rumble with hunger. Earlier that morning, a customer had dropped a bag of apples near the store's entrance, and while most had been cleaned up, the sweet smell lingered on the pavement. The young bear had spent the last 2 days foraging unsuccessfully, its mother having disappeared 3 days prior during what the cub didn't understand was a territorial dispute with an older male bear. As the cub approached the store's entrance, its small paws clicking softly on the asphalt, The automatic door sensors detected movement. The glass doors slid open with their familiar mechanical whir, startling the cub. It jumped back, then crept forward again, curiosity overcoming caution. Jake Morrison had abandoned his delivery and was now reaching for his cell phone, unsure whether to call animal control or simply warn the people inside the store. His hands shook slightly as he dialed, but before he could complete the call, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The cub had ventured too close to the automatic doors, and as it tried to retreat, one of its back paws had somehow become caught in the door's track mechanism. The doors, confused by the obstruction, began to close and open repeatedly, each cycle putting more pressure on the trapped limb. The cub's frightened yelp pierced the morning air, a sound so raw and desperate that it seemed to freeze time itself. Inside the store, conversation stopped mid-sentence as shoppers turned toward the windows, trying to understand what they were hearing. Riley felt her heart skip as Mia suddenly let out a sharp cry, her tiny body tensing in the cart seat. The baby's eyes were wide with what looked like distress, her small face scrunched as if she were about to burst into tears. But instead of crying, Mia began making soft, urgent sounds, her arms reaching toward the front of the store with surprising determination. "What's wrong, baby?" Riley asked, abandoning her shopping to push the cart toward the windows. Other customers were gathering near the entrance, their voices rising in concern and confusion. Through the glass doors, Riley saw the small bear cub struggling against the malfunctioning automatic doors, its frightened cries growing more desperate with each failed attempt to free itself. The sight hit her like a physical blow. The helpless animal, barely more than a baby itself, trapped and terrified. But what struck Riley even more was her daughter's reaction. Mia had gone completely still, her dark eyes locked on the struggling cub with an intensity that seemed impossible for such a young child. The baby's breathing had quickened, and her small hands were clenched into fists, as if she were experiencing the cub's pain as her own. "Someone needs to help that poor thing," whispered an elderly man standing nearby, but his voice carried the uncertainty that everyone felt. How did you approach a wild animal, even a young one, without making the situation worse? The automatic doors continued their erratic cycle, and with each movement the cub's distress grew more apparent. Its small body trembled with exhaustion and fear, and Riley could see that its trapped paw was beginning to swell. That's when Mia did something that no one, especially Riley, could have anticipated. The baby suddenly threw her head back and let out a series of sounds that Riley had never heard before. They weren't cries or typical baby babbling, but something else entirely. Low, rhythmic vocalizations that seemed to mirror the cub's distressed calls. The sounds came from deep in Mia's throat, almost like she was trying to communicate in the bear's own language. Riley's hands gripped the cart handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Mia, what are you doing?" she whispered, but her daughter seemed completely absorbed in her strange behavior. The baby's entire body was rigid with concentration, her dark eyes never leaving the trapped cub. Around them, other shoppers had begun to notice Mia's unusual sounds. Mrs. Patterson had left her register and was making her way toward the crowd gathering near the windows. Her weathered face showed a mixture of concern and bewilderment as she watched the baby's intense reaction. "I've never seen anything like it," murmured a woman in her 50s, adjusting her glasses to get a better look at both the cub and the baby. "It's like she knows that little bear." Outside, Jake Morrison had finally managed to get through to animal control, but they told him it would be at least 20 minutes before anyone could arrive. 20 minutes felt like an eternity as he watched the cub's struggles growing weaker. The young bear's breathing was becoming labored, and Jake could see dark spots on the pavement that he feared might be blood. The store manager, David Kim, had emerged from his office after hearing the commotion. A practical man in his early 40s, David had dealt with his share of unusual situations during his 15 years running Miller's Grocery, but nothing quite like this. He approached the crowd cautiously, trying to assess the situation while keeping his customers safe. "Has anyone called for help?" David asked, pulling out his own phone. "Animal control is on the way," Jake called from outside, "but they said it might take a while." David nodded grimly. He knew the local animal control office was understaffed and located nearly 30 miles away. The cub might not survive that long if something wasn't done soon. Meanwhile, Mia's vocalizations had taken on a different quality. The sounds were becoming softer, more melodic, almost like a lullaby. Riley found herself leaning closer to her daughter, fascinated despite her worry. She had always known Mia was special. The baby had been unusually alert since birth, seeming to understand conversations and respond to emotions in ways that surprised even their pediatrician. But this was different. This felt almost supernatural. The strangest part was that the cub seemed to be responding. Its frantic struggling had slowed, and it was now looking directly at the store windows, as if it could somehow sense Mia's presence through the glass. The young bear's breathing was still rapid, but its movements had become less erratic. "Look at that," breathed Mrs. Patterson, pointing toward the cub with a trembling finger. "The little thing is calming down." It was true. While the automatic doors continued their mechanical stuttering, trapping the cub's paw with each cycle, the bear itself had stopped fighting so desperately. Its small head was tilted toward the store, ears perked forward as if listening to something only it could hear. Riley felt a chill run down her spine. Her daughter was somehow communicating with a wild animal, and impossible as it seemed, the communication appeared to be working. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a veterinarian who had been shopping for pet supplies, pushed through the small crowd to get a better look at the situation. She had dealt with wildlife emergencies before, and her trained eye immediately assessed the cub's condition. "The swelling around its paw is getting worse," she announced to the group. "If we don't get it free soon, there could be permanent damage." David turned to her hopefully. "Is there anything we can do? Some way to override the door system?" Dr. Martinez shook her head. "I'm not familiar with the mechanics of automatic doors, but even if we could free it, we'd still have the problem of dealing with a frightened wild animal. Where there's a cub, there's usually a mother nearby." As if summoned by her words, a new sound drifted across the parking lot. A deep, rumbling call that made everyone freeze. From the tree line beyond the parking lot, a large shape was beginning to emerge. The mother bear, bigger than any of them had imagined, was finally making her appearance. Jake Morrison felt his heart rate spike as he watched the massive bear lumber into view. She was easily 4 times the size of her trapped cub, with dark fur that seemed to absorb the morning sunlight. Her head swung back and forth as she scanned the area, trying to locate the source of her baby's distress calls. Inside the store, the atmosphere had shifted from concern to genuine fear. Several customers began backing away from the windows, and David was already reaching for the phone to call the police. But Mia's reaction was the most unexpected of all. Instead of becoming more agitated at the sight of the mother bear, the baby seemed to grow calmer. Her strange vocalizations continued, but they had taken on an even gentler quality, almost soothing in their rhythm. Riley watched in amazement as her daughter extended one tiny hand toward the window. Fingers splayed as if reaching for both bears simultaneously. The baby's expression was serene, completely at odds with the tension filling the store. "She's not afraid," Riley whispered to herself, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "She's not afraid of them at all." The mother bear had spotted her cub now, and was moving across the parking lot with surprising speed for such a large animal. Her powerful muscles rippled beneath her fur as she approached, but there was something in her gait that wasn't quite what Jake had expected. Instead of the aggressive charge he had feared, her movement seemed more deliberate, almost cautious. Dr. Martinez had noticed it too. "She's being careful," the veterinarian observed. "She can see her cub is trapped, but she's not attacking the doors or trying to force the situation. That's unusual behavior for a protective mother." The mother bear stopped about 10 feet from the store entrance, studying the scene with intelligent brown eyes. She could clearly see her cub struggling in the door mechanism, but something was giving her pause. Her massive head turned slightly, as if she too was listening to sounds that others couldn't quite perceive. Inside the store, Mia had begun to move in her cart seat, small hands reaching upward as her vocalizations continued. Riley found herself caught between maternal protectiveness and fascination with her daughter's extraordinary behavior. "We need to get everyone away from the windows," David said, his voice tight with concern. "If that mother bear decides to charge—" But before he could finish his sentence, something happened that no one could have predicted. The mother bear, instead of advancing toward the store, sat down on her haunches and began to make her own vocalizations, deep, resonant sounds that seemed to answer Mia's gentle calls. The parking lot filled with an otherworldly conversation between a human baby and 2 wild bears, a communication that transcended species and touched something primal in everyone who witnessed it. Riley felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she watched her daughter participate in this impossible dialogue. Mia's small face was radiant with concentration and what could only be described as joy, as if she had finally found others who spoke her language. But even as this miraculous exchange continued, the cub's situation was becoming more critical. The automatic doors showed no signs of stopping their erratic cycling, and despite the young bear's calmer demeanor, its trapped paw was clearly causing significant pain. It was then that Riley made a decision that would change everything. Setting her jaw with determination, she began to push Mia's cart toward the store entrance, much to the alarm of everyone around her. "Riley, what are you doing?" Mrs. Patterson called out, reaching for the cart to stop her. Riley looked back at the concerned faces surrounding her, then down at her daughter, who was gazing up at her with those impossibly knowing eyes. "She wants to help," Riley said simply, "and I think she's the only one who can." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything rational and safe. David stepped forward, his face pale with concern. "Riley, you can't seriously be thinking of taking a baby near wild bears. That mother could attack at any second." But as David spoke, something extraordinary was happening outside. The mother bear had begun to move closer to the store entrance, not with aggression, but with what could only be described as deliberate caution. Her massive paws made soft padding sounds on the asphalt as she approached her trapped cub, but her eyes kept shifting toward the store windows where Mia's sounds continued to drift through the glass. Dr. Martinez watched the scene with professional fascination mixed with disbelief. "In 20 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. "The mother should be frantic, aggressive. Instead, she's actually responding to the baby's calls." Riley pushed the cart another few feet toward the entrance, despite the protests from the gathered customers. Mia's vocalizations had grown stronger, more confident, as if the proximity to the bears was energizing her somehow. The baby's small hands were pressed against the cart's safety bar, her entire body straining forward with an urgency that broke Riley's heart. "Ma'am, please," Jake Morrison called from outside, where he had positioned himself behind his delivery truck. "That mother bear weighs at least 300 pounds. If something goes wrong—" but Jake's words trailed off as he witnessed something that defied explanation. The mother bear had reached her cub and was now gently nuzzling the young one's head with her massive snout. Instead of trying to force the doors open or attacking the mechanism that held her baby captive, she was making soft, rumbling sounds that seemed to echo Mia's gentle calls. Inside the store, Mrs. Patterson had tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. 67 years I've lived in these mountains, she said in a voice barely above a whisper, and I've never seen the likes of this. That baby, there's something special about her. Riley felt a chill run through her body as she realized that Mrs. Patterson was right. This wasn't just coincidence or her imagination. Mia possessed some kind of ability that she was only beginning to understand, and that ability was currently the only thing standing between the trapped cub and a potentially tragic outcome. The automatic doors continued their mechanical stuttering, each cycle causing the cub to whimper softly. The young bear's breathing had become more labored, and Riley could see that its trapped paw was now visibly swollen. Time was running out. "I have an idea," Dr. Martinez said suddenly, her professional training overriding her amazement at the situation. "If that baby really can communicate with them somehow, maybe she can calm them enough for us to manually override the door system." David looked at her incredulously. "You want to use a 6-month-old baby as a what? A bear whisperer?" "Look at them." Dr. Martinez pointed toward the bears. "Look how they're responding to her. The mother isn't showing any signs of aggression, and the cub has stopped panicking. If we're going to try anything, this might be our only chance." Riley felt her heart pounding as she considered the veterinarian's words. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to take Mia and leave immediately, to get as far away from the dangerous situation as possible. But as she looked down at her daughter, she saw something in those dark eyes that gave her pause. Mia wasn't afraid. If anything, the baby seemed more alert and engaged than Riley had ever seen her. The strange vocalizations continued to flow from her small throat with an almost musical quality, and with each sound, both bears seemed to grow calmer. "There's a manual override switch for the doors," David said reluctantly, "but it's located right next to the entrance. Someone would have to get very close to both bears to reach it." "I'll do it," Dr. Martinez volunteered immediately. "I have experience with wildlife, and if the baby can keep them calm—" "No," Riley interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "If anyone's going to risk it, it should be me. She's my daughter, and I think I understand what's happening here better than anyone." The truth was, Riley didn't understand what was happening at all, but she could feel it, some kind of connection between her daughter and the bears that went beyond normal comprehension. It was as if Mia had been born with a language that only certain creatures could speak, and she was finally getting the chance to use it. Before anyone could protest further, Riley began pushing the cart toward the store entrance. With each step, Mia's sounds grew more pronounced, and the bear's responses became more obvious. The mother bear had settled into a sitting position beside her trapped cub, her massive head tilted toward the store as if listening intently to the baby's calls. "Riley, wait," Mrs. Patterson called out, hurrying after her. "Let me help. These old hands might not be steady, but I know every inch of this store." The elderly cashier's offer surprised everyone, but Riley felt a surge of gratitude. Having someone with experience in the store could make the difference between success and disaster. As they approached the entrance, Riley could see the mechanical override panel mounted on the wall just to the right of the automatic doors. It was closer to the bears than she had hoped, but not impossibly so. The real question was whether Mia could maintain whatever spell she seemed to have cast over the wild animals. The cub, sensing their approach, lifted its small head and looked directly at Mia through the glass doors. The young bear's eyes, dark and intelligent, seemed to focus on the baby with an intensity that made Riley's breath catch. For a moment, it felt as if time stood still, as if the entire world had narrowed down to the connection between her daughter and this trapped wild creature. Then Mia did something that made everyone gasp. The baby lifted her small hand and placed it flat against the glass door, directly in line with the cub's gaze. The young bear, despite its pain and fear, managed to lift its own tiny paw and press it against the glass from the other side. The sight of the baby's hand and the cub's paw separated only by a thin sheet of glass brought tears to Riley's eyes. It was as if two infants from completely different worlds had recognized something in each other that adults couldn't understand. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Martinez, "I've never seen anything like this in my life." The mother bear, witnessing this interaction, made a sound that was unlike anything any of them had heard before. It wasn't a roar or a growl, but something almost melodic, a deep, harmonious note that seemed to vibrate through the air and into their very bones. Mia responded immediately, making her own sounds that somehow matched the mother bear's tone. The two voices, one impossibly small and human, the other massive and wild, created a duet that filled the morning air with something that could only be described as music. Riley felt her resolve solidify. Whatever was happening here was bigger than her fears, bigger than the risk. Her daughter was part of something extraordinary, and she wasn't going to let fear prevent her from helping save the trapped cub. "Mrs. Patterson," she said quietly, "when I give you the signal, can you reach that override switch?" The elderly woman nodded, her eyes bright with determination despite her age. "I've been reaching that switch for maintenance calls for 20 years, dear. I can do it." Riley took a deep breath and looked down at Mia one more time. Her daughter gazed back at her with those knowing eyes, as if she understood exactly what they were about to attempt. "Okay, sweetheart," Riley whispered. "Let's help your friend." She reached for the door handle, knowing that the next few moments would either result in a miracle or a tragedy. Behind her, she could hear David on the phone with emergency services, his voice tight with tension as he described the unprecedented situation unfolding at Miller's grocery. But as Riley's hand touched the door handle, something happened that changed everything once again. From the tree line beyond the parking lot came a sound that made everyone's blood run cold, the unmistakable roar of another bear, this one filled with aggression and territorial anger. The mother bear's head snapped up, her entire body tensing as she recognized the call. Her peaceful demeanor evaporated in an instant, replaced by the fierce protectiveness of a mother whose territory was being invaded. The new arrival wasn't just any bear. It was a massive male, likely the same one who had driven her and her cub from their original territory days earlier. Jake Morrison scrambled further behind his truck as the enormous male bear emerged from the forest. This bear was even larger than the mother, with scars across his muzzle that spoke of numerous fights and victories. His presence changed the entire dynamic of the situation, transforming what had been a delicate rescue operation into a potential three-way confrontation with a human baby caught in the middle. Mia's reaction to this new development surprised everyone once again. Instead of becoming agitated or frightened, the baby's vocalizations shifted to a new pattern entirely, urgent, commanding sounds that seemed to carry authority despite coming from such a small source. The mother bear responded immediately to Mia's calls, positioning herself protectively between her trapped cub and the approaching male. But instead of preparing for a fight, she continued to echo the baby's sounds, as if following instructions that only she could understand. Riley realized with growing amazement that her daughter wasn't just communicating with the bears. She was somehow coordinating them, orchestrating their behavior in a way that defied every law of nature she had ever learned. The male bear paused at the edge of the parking lot, his massive head swiveling between the mother bear, the trapped cub, and the store full of humans. Something in Mia's continued vocalization seemed to give him pause, causing him to sit back on his haunches rather than charging forward as everyone expected. "She's doing it," Dr. Martinez breathed, her voice filled with awe. "That baby is actually managing all 3 bears at once." Riley felt a surge of pride mixed with terror as she realized the full scope of what her daughter was attempting. Mia wasn't just trying to help one trapped cub, she was preventing what could have been a violent confrontation that might have resulted in tragedy for both the bears and the humans watching. But the effort was clearly taking its toll on the baby. Mia's small face was flushed with concentration, and her breathing had become rapid and shallow. Riley could see that her daughter couldn't maintain this level of communication much longer. "We have to move now," she said to Mrs. Patterson, her voice urgent with the knowledge that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Whatever she's doing, she can't keep it up forever. Mrs. Patterson nodded grimly, understanding the stakes. As Riley slowly opened the door, both women held their breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether this impossible rescue attempt would end in triumph or disaster. The moment the door cracked open, the morning air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and something else, the musky, wild smell of the bears themselves. Riley felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she stepped halfway through the doorway, Mia's cart positioned carefully behind her. The baby's vocalizations immediately grew louder and more complex, as if the removal of the glass barrier had amplified her ability to communicate. The sounds that emerged from Mia's small throat were unlike anything Riley had ever heard from a human child. They contained harmonics and rhythms that seemed to resonate with something primal in the mountain air. The mother bear's response was immediate and startling. She turned her massive head toward Riley and Mia, and for a terrifying moment Riley thought she had made a fatal mistake. But instead of aggression, the mother bear's eyes held what could only be described as recognition. She made a soft, chuffing sound, almost like a greeting, and then turned back to her trapped cub with renewed purpose. The male bear, still positioned at the edge of the parking lot, had also responded to Mia's enhanced vocalizations. Instead of the territorial aggression everyone expected, he began to pace in a wide circle, his movements deliberate and controlled. It was as if he was patrolling the area, establishing a protective perimeter rather than preparing to attack. "This is impossible, Doctor," Martinez whispered from inside the store, watching through the windows as the scene unfolded. "She's not just communicating with them, she's organizing them into a coordinated group." Mrs. Patterson, despite her 70-plus years, moved with surprising agility as she positioned herself near the door override panel. Her weathered hands trembled slightly, but her resolve was firm. "I've lived through 2 wars and raised 6 children," she muttered to herself. "I can handle a few bears." The trapped cub, sensing the increased activity around it, began to struggle more vigorously against the malfunctioning doors. Each movement caused it to whimper in pain, and Riley could see fresh blood on the pavement where the door mechanism had abraded the young bear's paw. Mia's reaction to the cub's distress was immediate and heartbreaking. Tears began streaming down the baby's face, and her vocalizations took on a plaintive, almost singing quality that seemed to pierce straight through to everyone's soul. It was as if she was experiencing the cub's pain as her own, sharing in its suffering in a way that transcended species. The mother bear heard her baby's cries and Mia's responding calls, and something shifted in her massive frame. She rose to her full height, nearly 7 feet tall, and for a moment Riley thought their careful plan was about to collapse into chaos. But instead of charging or retreating, the mother bear did something that defied all expectations. She began to sing. There was no other word for the sounds that emerged from the massive bear's throat. Deep, resonant notes that seemed to harmonize with Mia's higher-pitched calls, creating a duet that filled the parking lot with an otherworldly melody. The sound was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, ancient and primal, as if it came from a time when the barriers between human and animal consciousness were thinner. Jake Morrison, still crouched behind his delivery truck, felt tears running down his cheeks as he listened to the impossible song. "Dear God," he whispered into his cell phone, where the emergency dispatcher was demanding updates on the situation. "I don't know how to describe what I'm seeing here." The male bear's response to this musical dialogue was perhaps the most surprising of all. Instead of interrupting or challenging the mother bear's song, he began to add his own voice to the mix, deeper bass notes that provided a foundation for the harmonies created by Mia and the mother bear. The three voices together created something that transcended the sum of its parts, a primal symphony that seemed to connect directly with something fundamental in the hearts of everyone who heard it. Riley felt her own voice catch in her throat as she realized she was witnessing something that perhaps no human had ever experienced before. Her 6-month-old daughter was conducting a choir of wild bears, creating music that spoke to depths of consciousness that science had never imagined possible. But even as she marveled at the extraordinary scene, Riley remained focused on the immediate crisis. The trapped cub's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and she could see that its struggles were becoming weaker. They had minutes, perhaps less, before the young bear would lose consciousness from pain and blood loss. "Mrs. Patterson," Riley called softly, not wanting to disturb the delicate balance that Mia had achieved with the bears. "Can you reach the switch?" The elderly woman nodded and began to edge toward the override panel, her movements slow and deliberate. The mother bear's eyes tracked her motion, but the giant animal made no aggressive moves. Instead, she seemed to understand that Mrs. Patterson was trying to help, and she shifted her position slightly to give the woman better access to the door mechanism. As Mrs. Patterson reached for the override switch, something unexpected happened. The trapped cub, perhaps sensing that rescue was imminent, made one final, desperate attempt to free itself. The young bear twisted and pulled with what seemed like its last reserves of strength, and for a moment, Riley thought it might actually break free on its own. But the effort was too much. The cub's small body went limp, and its head lolled to one side as unconsciousness claimed it. The sight of her baby falling motionless caused the mother bear to let out a roar of anguish that shattered the musical harmony and replaced it with raw, primal grief. Mia's response was immediate and devastating. The baby let out a wail of such pure anguish that it seemed to echo the mother bear's pain perfectly. Riley had never heard her daughter make such a sound. It was as if Mia's heart was breaking along with the mother bear's, sharing in the grief of a potentially lost child. The male bear, responding to the mother's distress call, began to advance toward the store entrance with renewed purpose. His earlier calm demeanor was replaced by protective aggression, and Riley realized that their window of peaceful cooperation was rapidly closing. "Now, Mrs. Patterson," Riley shouted, abandoning any attempt at quiet coordination. "Hit the switch now." The elderly woman's arthritic fingers found the override button and pressed it firmly. The stuttering automatic doors immediately stopped their erratic cycling, but they remained partially closed, still trapping the unconscious cub's paw in the mechanism. Dr. Martinez burst through the store's secondary entrance, a first aid kit in her hands and determination written across her face. "I'm not letting that baby die," she announced, referring to the cub. "Not when we've come this far." The veterinarian approached the trapped cub with professional calm. Despite the presence of 2 adult bears less than 10 feet away, the mother bear watched her intently. But Mia's continued vocalizations, now soft, soothing sounds, rather than the earlier urgent calls, seemed to provide some kind of reassurance. "The paw is badly swollen, but I don't think it's broken," Dr. Martinez announced as she gently examined the unconscious cub. "If we can get it free and treat the swelling, it should recover fully." But freeing the cub required someone to manually force the door mechanism apart, and that would mean getting even closer to the mother bear. The massive animal was clearly on edge, her maternal instincts warring with whatever calming influence Mia seemed to possess. It was then that Riley made perhaps the most courageous decision of her life. She lifted Mia from the shopping cart and, holding her baby close to her chest, approached the mother bear directly. "Riley, no!" David shouted from inside the store, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Riley stopped just arm's length from the mother bear, close enough to feel the heat radiating from the massive animal's body and to smell the wilderness on her fur. Mia, cradled in her mother's arms, reached out one tiny hand toward the giant bear's snout. The mother bear, instead of reacting with aggression or fear, lowered her massive head until it was level with the baby. Mia's small fingers touched the bear's wet nose, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, human and bear regarded each other with perfect understanding. The connection between them was so powerful that everyone watching felt it like a physical force. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the intensity of the communication passing between the baby and the mother bear, a conversation conducted in languages older than words. When the mother bear finally lifted her head, her eyes held a calmness that hadn't been there before. She looked directly at Dr. Martinez, then at the trapped cub, and then back at Mia. The message was clear. She was giving permission for the humans to help her baby. Dr. Martinez didn't waste a second. She positioned herself at the door mechanism and began working to manually separate the doors far enough to free the cub's trapped paw. The mother bear watched every movement intently, but made no move to interfere. Mrs. Patterson, inspired by the extraordinary trust being displayed, moved to help the veterinarian. Together, the two women managed to create enough space for the cub's paw to slip free from the mechanism. The moment the young bear was released, the mother bear gently nuzzled it with her snout, making soft, encouraging sounds. The cub's eyes fluttered open, and it looked around in confusion before focusing on its mother's familiar face. But the reunion was interrupted by another development that no one had anticipated. The male bear, who had been maintaining his protective perimeter, suddenly stiffened and turned toward the forest. From deep in the woods came new sounds, the calls of other bears, multiple voices responding to the earlier roars and songs. Riley felt her blood turn to ice as she realized what was happening. The musical dialogue between Mia and the bears hadn't just attracted the attention of these three animals. It had apparently called to every bear within miles of the store. Jake Morrison, still positioned behind his truck, was the first to spot them. "Oh, God," he called out, his voice cracking with fear. "There are more coming, a lot more." Through the trees, dark shapes were becoming visible as at least 6 more bears of various sizes made their way toward Miller's grocery. Some were adults, others appeared to be juveniles, and all of them seemed drawn by whatever irresistible force Mia had unknowingly unleashed with her extraordinary vocalizations. The mother bear, with her newly freed cub, looked toward the approaching group and made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of fleeing or preparing to defend her territory, she sat down beside Mia and Riley and began making welcoming calls to the newcomers. Riley realized with growing amazement and terror that her daughter hadn't just saved one bear cub. She had somehow called a gathering of the local bear population, creating what could be either the most beautiful or most dangerous situation any of them had ever witnessed. Mia, still cradled in her mother's arms, seemed completely unaware of the chaos she had created. The baby's dark eyes were bright with contentment as she continued to make soft, musical sounds that were answered by every bear within earshot. "What do we do now?" Dr. Martinez asked, her professional calm finally showing cracks as she watched more and more bears emerging from the forest. Riley looked down at her daughter, then at the growing assembly of wild animals, and realized that they were about to find out just how deep Mia's mysterious abilities truly ran. The first of the approaching bears to reach the parking lot was an enormous female, even larger than the mother bear they had been dealing with. Her fur was a rich chocolate brown, and old scars across her shoulders spoke of years of survival in the wilderness. She approached slowly, her massive head swaying from side to side as she assessed the unprecedented scene before her. What happened next defied every piece of wildlife knowledge that Dr. Martinez had accumulated in her professional career. Instead of establishing dominance or showing territorial aggression, the newcomer sat down at the edge of the parking lot and began to make soft, questioning sounds toward Mia. The baby responded immediately, her vocalizations taking on a welcoming quality that seemed to put the giant bear at ease. "This is impossible, Doctor," Martinez whispered, her hands shaking as she watched more bears emerge from the tree line. "Bears don't gather like this. They're solitary animals, especially this time of year." But the evidence before their eyes suggested otherwise. A young adult male, probably 2 years old, appeared next, followed by what looked like a mother with twin cubs of her own. Each new arrival followed the same pattern. Approach cautiously, make questioning sounds toward Mia, receive some kind of vocal response from the baby, and then settle into a peaceful position around the parking lot's perimeter. Jake Morrison had climbed onto the roof of his delivery truck for a better vantage point, and to put more distance between himself and the growing congregation of bears. From his elevated position, he could see even more dark shapes moving through the forest, all converging on Miller's grocery. "There must be 12 of them now," he called down to the people near the store entrance. "Maybe more. I've never seen anything like this in my entire life." Inside the store, David was on the phone with emergency services, but his explanations were becoming increasingly frantic and unbelievable. "Yes," I said, 12 bears. "No, they're not attacking. They're sitting in a circle around a baby. I know how that sounds, but..." The dispatcher's skeptical responses were audible even from where Riley stood, still holding Mia close to her chest. The baby seemed completely oblivious to the supernatural nature of what she was orchestrating. Her dark eyes moved from bear to bear with the same curious interest she might show toward colorful toys, and her soft vocalizations continued to flow in complex patterns that somehow made sense to every wild animal within earshot. Mrs. Patterson, who had lived in these mountains longer than anyone, found herself remembering stories her grandmother had told her as a child, old Cherokee legends about children who could speak with the spirits of the forest, who could call the animals to gather in times of great need. She had always dismissed them as fairy tales, but watching Mia's interaction with the bears made her wonder if some old truths had been forgotten rather than proven false. The original mother bear, her rescued cub now alert and nursing at her side, seemed to have appointed herself as some kind of guardian for Mia. She remained close to Riley and the baby, making soft protective sounds whenever any of the other bears moved too close. It was as if she understood that Mia was somehow responsible for this gathering and felt obligated to ensure the child's safety. The male bear who had first threatened the situation had transformed from aggressor to sentinel. He positioned himself between the store and the forest, his massive frame alert for any potential threats that might approach the unusual assembly. His behavior suggested that he, too, recognized Mia's special role in what was unfolding. Dr. Martinez, her veterinary training warring with the impossibility of what she was witnessing, began to move carefully among the bears. Her professional eye assessed each animal, looking for signs of disease or unusual behavior that might explain their unprecedented gathering. What she found instead was a collection of healthy, alert bears who seemed to be participating in some kind of ancient ritual that humans had long forgotten. "Look at their eyes," she called softly to Riley. "They're not showing any signs of rabies or other neurological conditions. If anything, they seem more aware, more intelligent than any wild bears I've ever encountered." The youngest cubs in the group had begun to play together in the spaces between the adults, their playful wrestling and tumbling creating an almost domestic scene that would have been heartwarming if it weren't taking place in a grocery store parking lot surrounded by their massive parents. Mia watched the playing cubs with obvious delight, her baby laughter mixing with her continued vocalizations in a way that seemed to encourage the young bears' games. It was as if she recognized kindred spirits in the other babies, regardless of species. But the most remarkable development came when one of the newer arrivals, a mature female with distinctive white markings on her chest, approached Riley directly. The bear moved with deliberate slowness, her body language clearly non-threatening, until she was close enough that Riley could feel the animal's warm breath on her face. The bear made a series of soft, complex sounds that seemed directed specifically at Riley rather than at Mia. Riley found herself responding instinctively, making soft humming sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. To her amazement, the bear appeared to understand, nodding her massive head before settling down beside the mother bear with the rescued cub. "She's communicating with you, too," Dr. Martinez observed with wonder. "Whatever gift your daughter has, it's somehow extending to you as well." Riley felt a strange tingling sensation throughout her body, as if Mia's presence was awakening abilities she never knew she possessed. The feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying, opening doorways in her mind that had perhaps been closed since childhood. The gathering continued to grow as more bears arrived, each one adding their voice to what had become a complex symphony of natural sounds. The harmony they created was unlike anything any human had ever recorded, a musical collaboration between wild creatures that spoke to something fundamental about the connection between all living things. Inside the store, the remaining customers had gathered at the windows to watch the unprecedented scene. Some were taking videos with their phones, though the footage would later prove inadequate to capture the full emotional impact of what they were witnessing. Others simply stood in awed silence, sensing that they were present for something that would change their understanding of the natural world forever. It was Mrs. Patterson who first noticed the change in the sky. Dark clouds had begun to gather overhead, despite the morning having started clear and bright. The wind picked up, rustling through the pine trees with increasing intensity, as if nature itself was responding to the unusual assembly in the parking lot. "Storm's coming," she announced, her weathered face turned toward the darkening sky, "and it's coming fast." The bears seemed to sense the approaching weather as well. Their vocalizations took on a different quality, more urgent and coordinated, as if they were discussing plans that only they could understand. Several of the adults began moving toward the forest edge, but instead of leaving, they seemed to be organizing some kind of formation. Mia's response to the changing weather was immediate and concerning. The baby's earlier contentment was replaced by agitation, and her vocalizations became more insistent, almost commanding. Riley could feel her daughter's small body tensing with some kind of anticipation or preparation. "Something's wrong," Riley said, her maternal instincts picking up on subtle changes in Mia's behavior. "She's sensing something we're not." Dr. Martinez looked up at the rapidly darkening sky with growing concern. "Mountain weather can change quickly, but this feels different, more intense than a normal storm system." The first drops of rain began to fall, but instead of seeking shelter, the bears remained in their positions around the parking lot. Their formation had become more organized, with the largest adults forming an outer circle and the mothers with cubs positioned in the center near Riley and Mia. Jake Morrison, still perched on his truck, called down with increasing urgency. "The wind's really picking up out here. This isn't looking like a normal storm. Maybe we should all get inside." But as he spoke, something happened that made everyone freeze in amazement. The rain that was beginning to fall seemed to be avoiding Mia and the area immediately around her. Water droplets that should have soaked the baby and Riley were somehow being deflected, creating a dry circle in the middle of the growing storm. The bears around them showed no surprise at this phenomenon, as if they had expected it all along. Their protective formation tightened, and their vocalizations became a steady, rhythmic chant that seemed to harmonize with the wind and rain. "This isn't possible, Doctor," Martinez breathed, watching the rain part around them like water flowing around a stone. "The laws of physics don't work this way." But Mia seemed to understand exactly what was happening. Her earlier agitation had been replaced by a deep concentration, and her vocalizations had taken on the steady, powerful quality of the adult bears around her. It was as if she was participating in some kind of ritual that predated human understanding, drawing on abilities that connected her to forces far older than civilization. The storm intensified rapidly, with lightning beginning to flash in the distance and thunder rolling across the mountain peaks. But instead of being frightened by the display of natural power, the bears seemed to draw strength from it. Their chanting grew louder and more complex, creating harmonies that seemed to resonate with the very frequency of the storm itself. Riley found herself caught between wonder and terror as she realized that her daughter wasn't just communicating with wild animals. She was somehow participating in a ceremony that connected the gathered creatures to the fundamental forces of nature itself. The dry circle around them expanded slightly, encompassing not just Mia and Riley, but several of the closest bears as well. Mrs. Patterson, her lifetime of mountain living having prepared her for many strange events, but nothing quite like this, moved closer to the protected area. As she stepped into the circle of dry ground, she felt a sensation like walking through an invisible barrier, as if she was entering a space where different rules applied. "It's warm in here," she announced with wonder. "Warmer than it should be, even without the rain." Dr. Martinez, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was observing, nevertheless followed Mrs. Patterson into the protected area. The moment she crossed the invisible boundary, she felt it too, a warmth that seemed to come from within the earth itself, radiating up through the soles of her feet and filling her body with an energy she had never experienced before. The storm reached its full intensity just as the last of the approaching bears arrived at the gathering. Lightning struck the mountainside nearby, the crack of thunder so loud it shook the windows of the store, but none of the bears showed any sign of fear. Instead, they seemed to be drawing power from the electrical energy in the air, their vocalizations reaching a crescendo that made the ground itself seem to vibrate. Mia, at the center of it all, had transcended her identity as a simple human baby. Her small form seemed to glow with an inner light, and her vocalizations had become something that was less sound than pure communication, a language that spoke directly to the souls of all living things present. It was then that Riley understood what was really happening. This wasn't just a gathering of bears responding to her daughter's unusual abilities. This was something far more profound, a convergence of natural forces that Mia had somehow triggered, bringing together wild creatures and the very elements themselves in a display of harmony that most humans had forgotten was possible. The realization brought with it both exhilaration and a deep sense of responsibility. Her daughter wasn't just gifted, she was connected to something ancient and powerful, something that came with obligations and dangers that Riley was only beginning to comprehend. As if sensing her mother's thoughts, Mia turned her dark eyes toward Riley and made a sound that was unmistakably communicative. It wasn't baby babbling or bear vocalizations, but something that seemed to speak directly to Riley's heart, conveying complex concepts about connection, responsibility, and the delicate balance between human civilization and the natural world. The storm began to subside as suddenly as it had arrived, but the gathering of bears showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, they seemed more settled, more permanent in their positions, as if they were establishing something that would last far beyond this single extraordinary morning. David, watching from inside the store with growing amazement and concern, realized that they were facing a situation that would require explanations no one was prepared to give. How do you tell authorities that a 6-month-old baby had summoned a gathering of wild bears and apparently controlled the weather? How do you document something that challenged every assumption about the relationship between humans and nature? But those concerns seemed distant and unimportant compared to the immediate reality of what continued to unfold in the parking lot. More changes were coming. Riley could sense it in the way Mia's attention had shifted toward the forest, where new sounds were beginning to emerge from deeper in the wilderness. Whatever had begun with a simple grocery shopping trip was far from over, and Riley had the distinct feeling that the most extraordinary developments were still to come. The sounds from deeper in the forest grew closer, and Riley's heart began to race as she realized they weren't coming from more bears. These were different, lighter, more delicate, but somehow familiar. Through the trees came creatures that made even the bear gathering seem ordinary by comparison. A family of deer emerged first, their usual wariness completely absent as they walked directly toward Mia without hesitation. Behind them came raccoons, their tiny hands visible as they climbed down from trees, followed by foxes, rabbits, and even a pair of mountain lions who moved with the same peaceful purpose as all the other. Dr. Martinez felt her knees grow weak as she watched the impossible procession. "Every species in the forest," she whispered in amazement. "She's calling every living thing within miles." The animals arranged themselves in natural harmony around the bears, creating concentric circles of different species that should have been predators and prey, now sitting together in perfect peace. The mountain lion settled beside the deer, the foxes curled up near the rabbits, and the raccoons chattered softly to the squirrels that had scampered down from the surrounding trees. Mia's vocalizations had evolved into something that transcended any single species' language. The sounds that flowed from her small form seemed to contain elements that every creature could understand, a universal communication that spoke to the deepest parts of their souls. But the most extraordinary moment came when the last visitor emerged from the forest. An ancient grizzly bear, larger than any of the others, with silver-tipped fur that marked him as the elder of the mountain. He moved slowly, with the dignity of great age and wisdom, and every other animal, from the smallest squirrel to the largest bear, turned to acknowledge his presence. The old grizzly approached Mia directly, his massive form moving with surprising gentleness. When he reached the baby, he lowered his great head until it was level with her face, and the two regarded each other in silence that seemed to stretch across centuries. What passed between them in that moment was invisible to human eyes but felt by every heart present. It was recognition, understanding, and something that felt like a benediction. The ancient bear made a single, deep sound that resonated through the ground itself, and Mia responded with a pure, clear note that seemed to contain all the joy and wonder of childhood. Riley felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter receive what could only be described as a blessing from the spirit of the wild itself. In that moment, she understood that Mia's gift wasn't just unusual, It was sacred, a bridge between two worlds that had been separated for too long. The old grizzly lifted his head and looked directly at Riley with eyes that held depths of wisdom accumulated over decades of mountain living. Without words, he conveyed a message that Riley felt in her bones. Mia was meant for something extraordinary, something that would change the relationship between humanity and the natural world forever. As the sun broke through the dissipating storm clouds, casting golden light across the impossible gathering, the animals began to disperse as naturally as they had arrived. They didn't flee or scatter, but moved away with the same peaceful purpose that had brought them together, each species returning to its place in the forest with something that hadn't been there before. The bears were the last to leave, each one approaching Mia for what seemed like a personal farewell. The mother bear, with her rescued cub, nuzzled the baby's cheek gently, a gesture of gratitude that transcended species. The original male bear, who had transformed from threat to protector, made soft sounds that seemed to promise continued watchfulness. Finally, only the ancient grizzly remained. He looked once more at Mia, then at Riley, and then at all the humans who had witnessed this impossible morning. His message was clear. They had been given a gift, a glimpse into possibilities that most people would never see, and with that gift came responsibility. With a final, resonant call that echoed across the mountains, the old bear turned and walked slowly back into the forest, his silver-tipped fur disappearing into the green shadows like a dream fading with dawn. The parking lot of Miller's grocery fell silent, except for the normal sounds of a mountain morning. Birds singing, wind rustling through pine needles, and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. If not for the dozens of paw prints in the damp asphalt and the tear stains on everyone's faces, it might have been possible to believe that none of it had really happened. Mia, exhausted from her extraordinary morning, had fallen asleep in Riley's arms. The baby's face was peaceful, her small hands still making gentle, grasping motions as if reaching for the friends who had just departed. She looked like any normal 6-month-old child, giving no hint of the miraculous abilities she had displayed. Mrs. Patterson was the first to break the silence. "In all my years on this mountain," she said quietly, "I never thought I'd live to see the old stories come true. That baby of yours, Riley, she's something special, something the world's been waiting for." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly, her scientific worldview forever changed by what she had witnessed. "I'll never be able to explain this in any medical journal, but I know what I saw. That child has a gift that could change everything we think we know about the connection between humans and animals." David, emerging from the store with shaking hands, looked around at the evidence of the morning's events. "The authorities are going to want explanations," he said. "What do we tell them?" Riley looked down at her sleeping daughter, then at the faces of the people who had shared this impossible experience with her. "We tell them the truth," she said simply. "We tell them that sometimes, when the world needs it most, something miraculous happens, and we promise to protect the miracle." Jake Morrison climbed down from his truck, his delivery forgotten in the face of what he had witnessed. "Nobody's going to believe us," he said, but his voice held no regret. "But that doesn't matter, does it? We know what happened here." As the morning wore on and normal life began to reassert itself around Miller's grocery, the small group of witnesses found themselves changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. They had seen proof that the barriers between species were not as solid as they had believed, that communication and understanding could transcend the boundaries that humans had created. Riley knew that Mia's abilities would likely manifest again, and that their quiet life in Cedar Falls would never be quite the same. But as she held her sleeping daughter close and felt the warmth of the morning sun on her face, She also knew that they had been given something precious, a glimpse of what the world could be when love and understanding bridged every gap. The story of what happened that day at Miller's grocery would be told and retold, growing in the telling until it became the stuff of legend. Some would dismiss it as fantasy. Others would search for scientific explanations that could never quite capture the full truth. But for those who were there, who witnessed a 6-month-old baby bring together every creature of the forest in perfect harmony, the memory would remain as clear and powerful as the moment it happened. They had seen the future, a world where the ancient connection between humans and nature had been restored by the pure heart of a child who knew no barriers, only love. And somewhere in the mountains around Cedar Falls, a community of wild animals carried with them the memory of that connection, waiting for the day when the baby who had called them together would grow into the woman who would change the world. The automatic doors of Miller's grocery slid shut behind them as Riley carried Mia toward their car. But the doors they had opened between two worlds would remain open forever, waiting for others brave enough to step through and discover the magic that had always been there, just waiting to be recognized. In her mother's arms, Mia slept peacefully, her small face touched by the golden mountain sunlight, dreaming perhaps of bear songs and forest symphonies, of a world where love spoke every language and every creature understood the universal call of a compassionate heart. The shopping they had come to do was forgotten, but they were taking home something far more valuable, the knowledge that miracles were real, that love could indeed move mountains, and that sometimes the most extraordinary events began with the simplest act of caring for another living being in need.